Flannigan. I'm a senior scientist for Quantum DX Group. First of all, I'd like to echo what John's already said. Thanks everybody for coming along, and it's great to do this again. It's been a long time since I've done any kind of presenting to any kind of audience what with COVID. So Teams, Zoom, things like that are not the same. So thanks for bringing it on. It's got to be back to some kind of normal. So I'll give you a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about today. I'll give you the background to Quantum DX itself, what the company is. Then talk about my career path. I guess that's what we're really here to focus on. I want to give you a few lessons learned as well, not necessarily just in career aspects, but in terms of life and things like that, and working in industry. And then at the end, some take-home messages. So what are the pros and cons? What does academia have to offer? What does an industrial setting have to offer based on the experience I've had? So first of all, introduction to quantum. We are a developer of point-of-care molecular diagnostics devices with focus on infectious disease. So the last few years have been fun. It was a lot quieter before 2020, put it that way. We're based in Newcastle. We have offices in Singapore and in the US as well. And we were founded in 2008 by a mad scientist called Jonathan O'Halloran, who decided that quitting his PhD in the US to found a small biotech company was a good idea. Probably wasn't to most people, but glad he did. He decided to relocate to his garage in Sussex and do a bit of point feasibility proof of principle work to show that you could detect amplified DNA on silicon nanowires, which he did. And then he was able to get some exclusive rights to develop a device related to that. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for taking the brunt. I think sometimes it worked out for him. And the company's got about 100 employees, not just in science. We've definitely changed the balance of the company in the last few years. We were mainly science-y company at the time. We're now transitioning into being a commercial company too. So we have people who work not just in science, engineering, manufacturing, also in things like marketing, quality management, which is super important in an industrial setting, HR, customer support, lots of different areas, lots of different backgrounds. We got our first commercial products in 2020. Again, not a coincidence that that was the year that everybody lost. We got quite a lot of funding there, and basically everything we were working on before then was put to one side. All bets were off. It was a COVID. We also managed to get our device, the QPOC, out in 2021. When I first joined the company in 2012, this was a pipe dream, and it looked a lot different to that. That's the actual real thing. It's now in labs diagnosing people in various parts of Europe and South America as well. So it's a real thing. If you want to Google QPOC later on, please include the hyphen. If you don't include the hyphen, what will come up is, because it's an acronym for queer people of color, it might come up with slightly different Google search results to what you were expecting. So the hyphen is important. We tried to change it, but it was just too far down the line and too much bother. So please include the hyphens. Quick timeline for you. Again, I've talked about a few bits of this. Quantum was founded in 2008 by Jonathan O'Halloran, or John O, as we call him, and the lady Julian Walton in Sussex. After the point of care principle stuff that John O did, Julian was persuaded by his wife to use his redundancy money from a job in the city to start the company up. He thought it was a terrible idea, so he wasn't. But yeah, I don't know how she persuaded him, but she did. Proof of principle data demonstrated DNA detection on silicon nanowires. A lot of work was done in South Africa up until about 2011. It wasn't a very good environment for mainly foreign-owned companies at the time in South Africa for various reasons. Plus, we were awarded various grants, one from the EU to work on malaria, and another NIHR grant as well, which allowed us to move the HQ from Stellenbosch to Newcastle. 2017, there's a lot of stuff between 2011 and 2017, believe me, this is just a highlight. We partnered with Global Good in the US, which is a joint funding body company. The idea being we would develop an HPV test and STI applications, and that triggered funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They've obviously got quite a lot of money behind them, the MGF, so that was great, and it was good for our visibility as well. 2020, £16 million came our way, which was great. It probably could and should have been more, but we didn't know the right people. Leave that to me. We managed to use that to put together our first commercial products, which was a lab-based COVID-19 diagnostic test. The idea being, here's a tube, it's got an assay, take your extracted DNA and RNA, put it in there, it'll tell you whether you have COVID-19 or not. We thought it was very, very good. It still holds up now. A lot of them that were marketed at the time as being particularly good, useful, have become less so with the emergence of new variants. We had quite a lot of redundancy built into ours, so it still works now. So we're pretty proud of that. 2021, we had funding around, I think it was around number 4, and we secured 11 million there, launched the QPOC, and we also, in exchange for some equity, we managed to raise 15 million from the IBD fund by Spring in Hong Kong. This is a big deal. In the past, investments might have been $500,000 here, $1 million there, something like that. This is a big investment for us. So it's good. You're not just talking about high net worth individuals here, you're looking at really big strategic investment groups. In 2022, we signed a distribution agreement with Menarini. Sounds a bit boring, probably is a little bit, but you also need people to put things in clinicians' hands. So they were able to take QPOC, say, this is a good device, can you use it? So onwards and upwards. We did get some pretty interesting visitors over the last few years. That was 2021. And I was just talking to Richie earlier on. If you have an impression of Boris Johnson in your head and the way you think he's going to be, he's exactly like that. So there's a lot to be said. I was saying earlier, there's a lot to be said by getting yourself as high as you can by being exactly who you are, which he's done, for better and for worse. So my career path. I joined Quantum in 2021 before the end of my thesis, actually, before the end of writing my thesis. So it was a busy first few weeks. I had to get that done and start with Quantum. I was quite lucky, Richie will remember this. There was a university-funded stipend almost. It's like a bridge between when you submitted your thesis and did your viva. So if you had 2 or 3 months to fill, you could talk to a local company and say, I'm free to work for you for a few months. You won't have to pay all my wage. Would you take me on for a few months? They used that as the probationary period for me. So the first 3 months were largely paid for by the university. I did all right, they kept me on, and the rest is history. I started working on DNA and RNA extraction at the very start, and still work on that to an extent now. I got promoted to senior scientist from research scientist in December 2015. There was a lot of that afterwards. I was not paid, which was nice. I've represented the company at various places. I think the biggest one was at Medica in Düsseldorf. It's an absolutely enormous trade show, basically, where they take essentially aircraft hangars and allow companies to put stands up in them. You're talking hundreds of companies in a massive area. So that was a big deal. It's a great chance to build relationships and collaborations and so on. I managed to get my name on a patent for DNA extraction resin, which was good. That was a nice thing to have. I've mentored some university undergrad students as well who we've had. They've come to us for a 12-month placement, and I've really enjoyed that actually. That's one of my highlights. It's probably one of the best things ever to see someone come in pretty shy, not know what they want to do, to become confident, skilled, and contribute all the time. That was really good. So I really enjoyed that. That's pre-COVID, and hopefully we can reestablish it at some point. You'll see. Since then, I've led the regulatory approval process from the science side to get one of our assays commercially approved. That was a baptism of fire and very, very busy. A lot of people were sat at home on furlough. I've never been busier in my life than then. It was crazy, but we got it done. And since then, I've also been technical lead on a long collaboration project between Quantum and an Aussie company, trying to port one of their assays onto our QPOC device down the line. It's been a challenge in a lot of ways. The goalposts were difficult to achieve, and arranging meetings was quite challenging, the time zones and stuff like that. But we managed to get quite a lot out of it, and it's gone pretty well generally from our side and from their side. So yeah, bit of a storm, but we got there. My career path. So a typical day. It's a common question, isn't it? What do you do? What's your typical day? No such thing for me. If you like having a typical day in routine, probably not good to work at Quantum. Office space is a pretty standard sort of day. We might plan experiments out, we might compile data, we might maintain and improve documentation. It's really important to do that when you're in an industrial setting. Meetings, email comms internally and with collaborators. Yeah, a lot of different things can take up a lot of your time in the office. You can also be lab-based. Something that I still work on is a lot of microfluidic DNA and RNA extraction. You have to do that in a really small, really small real estate in order for it to be applicable to your products. So I do a lot of that. We do a lot of PCR, We like PCR work. Running QPOCs, we have to run them a lot to get an idea of how often they might fail or might give an incorrect result. very rare, but you want to try and optimize as much as possible. So we might do something where maybe a bit of the software has been changed and you run hundreds and hundreds of QBox to see if this improves it or not, that sort of thing. So we do a lot of that kind of work as well. If you're in the lab, I think the most common days a mix. I'll do some office stuff. I might arrange other people's work. I might do some documentation, but also do my own lab work, which I like because I still enjoy it a lot. But you also get some days where it's just completely different. You might have potential investors visiting. If you have potential investors visiting, you might have a lot of money behind them, so you have to take them around, show them what to do, talk about what you're doing in the future. You might interview people for new roles. Verification and validation testing is almost like a clinical trial for us. That sort of thing is totally different. There's a lot of variety. It's very fast-paced and different. In terms of what I've learned over the last 10 plus years, I think it is really important to be at the right place at the right time, which is annoying because you work really hard to give yourself the best chance possible. But if we're recruiting people, sometimes it's a case of, well, we need someone to be able to do X. They might be really, really smart, but you might have somebody else who's done that a lot in their PhD or in the day-to-day work, and that'll put them into pole position. So it is a case of being right place, right time, which I was really to an extent. But that only gets you in the room, that gets you an interview. But after that, really, all the stuff that you've done, all the qualifications that you have don't really matter. John himself didn't finish his PhD. He's the CEO of this company. I've got a guy on the other side of the assay team called Phil, who's got a master's, doesn't have a PhD, and he's technically senior to me. So it depends on what you do when you get there. Start over here high. So when I got offered a job with Quantum, the only real downside I could see, and I really thought about it a lot, was the starting wage, because I felt like I've been at school for 20 years, maybe I should be earning X. I was probably right, but I thought, you know what, let's just do it. Everything else sounds good. I'm just going to go in there and do it. It didn't take long for you to start earning more and showing your worth if you've got that about you. They also gave me, I think it was 1,000 when I passed my Viva. So just little things like that to keep you sweet, was nice. So yeah, you can start low but in high. There's nothing wrong with going in, and as long as you're willing to, put up with having a little bit of a lower wage than you feel your worth at the start. If you achieve and you dig in, you'll get where you deserve to be. Don't get too attached to your projects. If you're doing a PhD, you have a project, and that's pretty much what you work on, and you get into that sort of tunnel vision, and that's fine. That's all good. But if you're doing something at Quantum, you might be doing something for 6 months, and then they might say, you know what, we don't want to do that anymore. We're going to park that because we've got an investor who's interested in this. So if you get really attached to that, that can be, I know it sounds quite soft and a bit valued, but you do get a bit attached to it. So as long as you don't mind things going to one side and you're a bit flexible and adaptable and don't take a stink about it, that probably stands you in a good way. If you don't like writing things down, don't work in industry. You have to write a lot down. You have to record things properly. You have to have designated protocols that are up to date. It's not a case of, I have a tube, I'm going to write a number 1 on it and chuck it in the fridge. I know what it is. That's not good enough. You've got to have dates on there. Lot numbers are very important. Expiry dates are more important. All these kinds of things. And you have to document what you do, because as far as quality is concerned, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So you have to get that together and make time for it. I guess I just said that quality management system, maintaining documentation, reporting things properly and formally is really helpful for everybody. It is good to seek forgiveness rather than ask permission. Sometimes you can have a lot of people who can chip into your work, and they might have slightly contradictory views on it. Sometimes it's good just to do things and say, oh yeah, I spent a bit of money there, but I proved this. That's a case of do as I say, not as I do, because I'm not great at that. I like permission to do stuff. But it is sometimes good to forget that and just do something. If you're that kind of person who just likes to do stuff, then I think this is probably a good setting for you. My last one, you're working in a team in industry for the most part. You're not just doing your own thing. You might be working as part of a small team, as a PhD student or something, or a postdoc, but you have to work collaboratively. If you can't work collaboratively and understand people, put yourself in their shoes, then it won't go very well for anybody involved. But at the same time, if you feel like you're particularly important to the team and you've been coming in quietly going about the business, sometimes that's not always the best thing to do. So you can feel free to highlight when it's appropriate. Don't be a whinger and use your time properly. But I think that's always a good thing to do as well. So it's a fine balance. Take home messages there, just to wrap up, I guess. Industry, academia, let's say it grows for the industry. Your job role is permanent, at least as long as your company's around. Your job role should be permanent. You're mixing with a lot of different people from a range of backgrounds and disciplines. You might not realize how much you're learning, but you do learn a lot. I know a lot about microfluidic behavior, for example. I know a lot about V&V. I know a lot about quality management system now. I didn't really know that in the past. You learn a lot by just being around different people, which is good. Very fast paced, if you like that. And I think a lot of people do. They like an exciting environment, then that's a good thing. You're not just about getting publications out there. I think sometimes it can be a little bit like that. You focus on publication rather than trying to do something that makes a tangible difference. It's not always the case, but it is sometimes the way. With us, it's all about getting a product out there, right? So if we get a publication out of something, fine. But it is all about getting something to a customer and getting them to use it. So when we have people using a QPOC on a genuine clinical patient sample and it comes out as positive, you've affected that person, right? So it's good for that side of it. Also, you can move. A lot of people have started off as scientists and moved into quality, into project management, into sales, and vice versa in some cases. In terms of cons, as I say, your job is only as secure as your company's financial footing is. If your company's in a bit of bother, a lot of companies are in a bit of bother at the minute for various reasons, then maybe you're not as secure as you want to be. On a related note, the current climate for investment in SME is pretty poor. If you have people who are earning a lot of money or got tens of millions in the bank, they can just put that in a savings account and get a lot of risk-free money back. So where's the incentive for them to invest in small companies? Less so than there was a few years ago, I would say. So, and you need, contrary to some people's belief, you need rich people. You need rich people to invest in small companies to help them start up. It's not just about the support. You might start on a wage that you consider lower. I've covered that. A lot of jobs are filled on an interview basis. We've had a lot of people be recommended to us by people who currently work for us for high jobs and for low jobs, if you like. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's nice to know that someone's good at what they do. It's nice to know that they'll fit in terms of their personality, in terms of work ethic and stuff. Because in an interview, you can guess, but you might not get the real person in an interview. So if someone recommends somebody, of course, they're going to get a bit of a bump. So I would say it's like that. Other people will, if you know someone who works for a particular company, ask them if they have positions open. And if they can put in work for you, that's always a good thing. So it can be a pro for certain people, but it can be a disadvantage. It's not always about what you know. It can sometimes be you have a connection which you can then use. But that's life. That's how it is. And I hope I've managed to cover quite a lot of ground there. So thanks very much. And if we have any questions, sure. No worries at all. Yes. The next speaker is Stephanie Clutterbuck, who's file manager at the Newcastle Clinical Trial.
Right, hello. So yeah, maybe the opening. Right. Right. So hi, I'm Steph. I want to be in clinical trial unit, which is literally the building right kind of outside this building. So what I was going to do is I was going to kind of give you an overview of my career path and then talk about what we do in clinical trials and then talk a bit about, I remember, so I did my PhD in the ION in medical science and started in 2010. And one of the first things they did, I don't know if they still do it now, but they bring you into a room and they show you the pyramid about here's all the PhD students and these are the people that make professors. And, this is the career path. I'm not sure if they still do that, but they did that. And I suppose I thought maybe a lot of you have had a neurologist there. And then things change and you realize actually you need to work outside of it. And then it's about trying to figure out what skills you gain as a PhD student that can really help you. And there is a lot. So right, so we'll get going with this. So this is, I'll just quickly show you this. So I started, I'm from Canada, by the way. I moved over here really randomly, completely randomly. Met my now husband, stayed and got into research. So this is what I'm kind of doing here. Luckily, my mom is from England, so I kind of it was easy enough for me to stay. But anyway, so I started in 2007. as a research assistant in with these people here, the population and health sciences, which used to be the Institute of Health and Society, with that nutrition. Actually, I'm lying. I really started with Richie very first. I was an assistant for a brief period of time before I got into care. So this is sort of how I know Richie. Sorry, Richie, you didn't make it onto my career.
That's fine.
You're 4 months. Sorry, I should put it up. But I do remember helping you and stuff, and this is how green I was. I remember that I had to set up something about PhD students in a poster talk. I was thinking, what are PhD students making posters for? I had no idea what a poster was that one. So I'd come along. So I worked in IHS on a nutrition study, then I worked on an alcohol study, and I really wanted to do my PhD due to being Canadian. I had to wait a couple of years, and then a PhD came up, and it was in the Institute of Neuroscience, which is now, I can't remember the name of it's changed to, but you know, something with neuroscience.
It's fine.
Is it okay? Right, it's called change since I'm on. So and so I just want to talk about this for a minute, because you're all faculty of medical science students, and obviously it's like quite a broad brush. So I was based in there, but I was part of the Center for Behavior and Evolution. And what that sort of means is my PhD was on the role of childhood adversity and in reproductive timing, or in reproductive trajectory and interest in infants, which I don't know if anybody's done that or is in might not be doing, but I'm showing you that just to sort of give you an idea that my background wasn't sort of lab-based, it wasn't, you know, sort of clinical, and I still sort of moved into the area and just to kind of give you an idea. So it was an evolutionary psychology study looking at how early childhood adversity might affect things like the reproductive timing and how that might be related to interest in infants. And I had girls taking part, they completed the questionnaire for various things, and they did the computer task to measure their interest in infant stimuli. Anyway, so back to sort of this. So this is where I ended up. I did my PhD, and I realized that if I wanted to stay in that area, I was going to have to, you know, it's very niche. I'd be moving all over. My husband and I were going to marry. My husband and I were going to get married. I knew I wanted a family. That family was really important to me. And I didn't want to have a career where I was postdocing for years and years and years, and then eventually maybe getting something just didn't appeal to me. I kind of wanted a bit more stability. So at the time, in my final year of my PhD, I was working as a research assistant. So for that final year, and I think studying neuroscience for the whole area, but really for your Gallagher. And I said, went to him and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And he suggested looking at clinical trials. And so I did. And so I managed to get a role as an assistant clinical trials manager as a clinical trials unit based on at the Center for Life. This was a really big multi-center study for spirit trial. It was looking at chronic myeloid leukemia, which is a type of leukemia. It might have changed by now, but it was then like the only one which could be treated with drugs and given the patient like the same sort of lifespan of a normal healthy person. So anyway, so I did that for a few months, but then my husband, his job, he got an opportunity to do a PhD now down in Cambridge, so we moved down there. And that's how I stayed in clinical trials as a clinical trial coordinator. I was based at the Royal Catholic Hospital, which was when I started there out in the kind of fields of Cambridgeshire, but now it's at Edinburgh State Centre. And there were some various trials there. Also, when we ended up starting our family. So I had my first daughter at this time. I also had my second daughter at that time too. So I had 2 daughters from that time in a couple of years. Then my husband's job moved us back up to Newcastle, and I sort of had to scramble because of rules in the NHS about maternity leave and all this stuff. I kind of had to scramble a bit. And the job I did down there didn't exist up here. So I moved into the Health Research Authority, which is something to work in clinical trials. It's the body that makes sure that all research that is done, health research that is done by NHS patients in the UK is ethical and legal, right? So then people, when COVID hit, we were also very busy because all of a sudden, every single trial that had to do with COVID had to be moved to the front of the queue so that we could review them quicker, and then they could get started. And also, it was quite interesting how many trials then were trying to tack something COVID related onto it just to get to the front of the queue. But mostly they were fine. It's fine. Right. So I worked as a criminal officer for a few years. I had my 3rd baby. That's it. I didn't have any more after that. But so that was the 3rd baby, and then decided I wanted to come back to Newcastle University, and I started as a project manager in the John Walton Muscular Dystrophy Research Center, which is down at the Center for Life, working with Jordy, which was great. And I did that for a year, and then I wanted to I kind of had this really varied kind of experience of sort of academia and working in clinical trials and working in health research and all this stuff, but I kind of wanted to really get a really good grasp of the technicalities of running a clinical research trial. And so that's why I moved back to the clinical trials again as a trial manager. So that's sort of my career trajectory today. So clinical trials, what is it? Technically, a clinical trial compares to a more treatment in patients. That's medicine, a procedure, or a device, right? It's something you might have heard of a term called a CTIM, which is a clinical trial of an investigational medicinal product. So that's like a drug trial, basically. And these are the ones we have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. And phase 1 will be like 3 or 4 people in a very contained environment, making sure the drug doesn't kill them. On to phase 4, we know this drug is marketed, it's all fine, but we're going to see how good it is at doing what it does. But in practice, we call it clinical trial, but in practice, it's kind of the job, all these jobs that I'm talking about, I worked at clinical trial. Basically, what you're doing is you are working in health-related research involving NHS patients. So they don't always come under this clinical trial thing. It could be anything from an observational study, it could be giving questionnaires to patients before heart surgery, see how they're feeling and see if there's an effect of that before and after. So just to give you like a little flavor, I kind of wrote down a few things of the trials I've worked on to kind of see the breadth of the thing. So when down at Papworth, I worked on a study that was looking at something called patent formula ovale, which is a hole in the heart that we all have when we're a fetus in the uterus. And when we're born, the negative pressure closes that hole, right? But sometimes it doesn't. And this study was looking to see if patients with obstructive sleep apnea had worse outcomes if they also had this hole in the heart. So we had to find these patients, which was pretty hard. We had to give them a bubble echo to see if they had the hole in the heart. And then we had to do some other stuff. Another trial I worked on was called the Rejuvenate study. And I didn't get to work on it too long because I went on a mat leave, but that study was really cool. It was looking to see if you could add a certain solution to donated blood, if that would, it kind of washed through the blood and it made the blood, in sort of really lay terms, made the blood think it was like day 1 blood instead of day 21 blood. And then the idea was that would be used in transfusions. It'd be a randomized trial, it'd be used in transfusions during surgery. The blood, and it was to see if sort of this washed blood would act just as good as new blood would, and you would have reduced incidence of inflammation in the organs in the body, better outcomes, and that sort of thing. When I was talking about Jordy here, let's see, right, that one there. So Jordy, he does neuromuscular diseases. He's a clinician, and he had a study called, I was studying on a study called the Myoguide study. So what this was doing was, there's over like 200 different neurodegenerative, neuromuscular diseases, but the problem is clinicians don't always know all of them, and they have to kind of look at an MRI of a leg and determine which one it is. Like, very difficult. So this study was looking to take machine learning algorithms, feed in an MRI, automatically segment the different muscles of the leg, then automatically suggest what the possible diagnosis could be. It would then have to be confirmed by DNA analysis, but that was a way of kind of helping clinicians. That was a really big trial too. It was global, so we were setting it up all over the world, and we were getting clinicians in neuromuscular disease all over the world to kind of donate these MRIs to a platform, an online platform that would be used by us, and so that was pretty cool. And right now, my current job, this one here. So the main trial I'm working on right now is a sarcoma study. So it's a randomized control trial, the gold standard. You've got a control and you've got obviously an intervention. The intervention in this trial is they will be given indocyanine green, which is a dye that's injected into them. It moves to the sarcoma tumor. It makes it glow when they're looking through, when the surgeon's looking through a camera during surgery, with the hope that helps the surgeon remove all of the tumor and reduce the recurrence of the tumor coming back, because the mortality rate in that patient is 35%. So it's not fantastic. And it's a type of cancer that affects 0 to 100. So nobody's sort of safe from that. So I guess I'm just telling you all that to give you an idea, with my background, getting girls to look at pictures of kids, babies, to see how interested they are in all these things. I've kind of moved through this thing and got to look at some really, really interesting projects. But in terms of what I actually do, hold on a minute. Oh, sorry. So just to go back to this clinical trial. So the aim of the clinical trial is obviously to improve patient outcome, right? You want to make patients better. And strengthen the evidence base of the medicine and that stuff that feeds into the NICE guidelines, which I'm not sure if you've heard of, but the NICE guidelines are the recommendations. They kind of take all the clinical data, trial data, they look at it from a cost, and cost benefits, patient outcomes, all these things, and they decide, okay, we're gonna suggest that the first line of treatment for that disease is this drug based on all these factors. So what they do is they take all the clinical trial evidence or research, health research related evidence and kind of make these recommendations based on that. So and then the other thing is to more along the lines of Marc here is about getting the drug or the device to market. So this is the CTIM is the drug and then guarantee is the device. And it's about, so after you've gone through these clinical trials, you've proved it's effective, then you need to get it licensed through the MHRA, so that so that it's all safe to use, and then get it out to the market and make the money basically. Right. So this is when you talk about clinical trial or health related research, this is basically what I do. I mean, I don't do all these bits. I do a lot of them though. And I will say the difference too is I've only ever worked in the public sector, I've never worked in the private sector. If you work in the private sector, lots of these things are done by other people. When you work in the public sector, you have to do all of it, which is great, but tiring. So basically, there's two different types of clinical trials. We've got things that are commercially led, right? So a commercial company like Marc's, I really want to find this out. You've got to do this trial for us. That's called commercial research. Otherwise, we've got investigator led. And this is the stuff that we do at Newcastle Clinical Trials Unit, which is when a clinician, a consultant will say, like the sarcoma, we've got Mr. Kenneth Rankin, he's an orthopedic surgeon in Nuth, and he wanted to find this out. So what he does, he comes to us with this idea, he said, I want to find out if we can find a better way to get tumors out of patients, and this is my idea. So we then work with him, we plan the trial. We then look at getting some funding. I don't know if I need to use that on there, but it all, you do the risk assessment. I'm not going to go through absolutely everything, but you develop the protocol, which allows you like experiencing, kind of figure out everything you need. You then find a funder. With us, it tends to be the NIHR. You apply to the NIHR, you say, this is the big thing we want to do. Can you give us the money? And they say, yeah, please, here, do it for us. So we get the money, and then we start working on all the documentation. So we're putting the trial master file together. That's like the handbook of the trials, making sure everybody's doing it, like Marc was saying, a bit like the quality management system. Everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, when they're supposed to be doing it. Otherwise, patients could get it. And data could be reasons integrity, which as scientists we all know is the worst. There's no point in doing anything if the data doesn't look correctly. And then we go to the different NHSs. So we've got this idea that this sarcoma trial is in 21 NHSs. We've got to go to all the NHS. And as you can imagine, working with NHSs to get that trial set up, it'll be a bit tricky. They've got a lot of bureaucracy and red tape, all that with them. Then we've got to go, this is where my old job, the HRA, and we've got to submit everything to ethics. I don't know if you have to do that, IRS, and any of your projects, but it's a nightmare, it's very funky. You get a whole bunch of things, you got a panel of independent people looking at your trial, taking it apart, deciding if it's safe for these patients to take part, that's great. And then you finally get to the end of the trial, which then you start collecting the data. But even in that, your job's done, you still have to go in and do things like monitoring. So we have the Newcastle Clinical Trials Unit, once the sarcoma study set up, we're currently at this stage right now. Once it's set up, then we've got all our 21 sites set up. We're going to have to be monitoring them on a regular basis to make sure they're collecting things the way they said they're going to the right. People are working on the trial. Everybody's, there's no breaches. Everything's kind of by the book, by the protocol. You live and die by the protocol. And if you make mistakes, we've got to report that you made a mistake. If you make changes, we've got to report that we're making changes and how we're going to make them. If there's anything like an emergency safety measure, maybe somebody dies, which is that you weren't expecting death. You weren't expecting death, then you've got to report that too. You've got to make sure everybody is very clear what's happening at every single point so that everybody's safe and the data that you get out of it is useful and can feed back into the NHS and that sort of thing. And then you've got the archiving, which archiving all your trial data for years and years and years. So this is basically what I was talking about in terms of your transferable skills. So when I try to think of, I've done a lot of interviews, like lots. I do interviews all the time. I'm great at getting interviews. I'm really bad at getting a job though. So I just but what I mean by that is that I spent a lot of time thinking about what are the things that my PhD gave me that works in this sort of environment. And it's all these sorts of things, like logistical planning, what mistakes could happen. We said that pregnant women weren't allowed to take part in the study. Well, is somebody going to make sure they have a pregnancy test? We said that they need to have bloods every 12 hours for the first 72 hours. Well, that's fine, but what happens with overnight? The research nurses have gone home, who's taking the blood, but where are they going? And are they getting to the freezers on time? And are they being labeled properly? It's all those sorts of things. If you've done a PhD, you might have had experience grant writing as a big part of it. There's sort of room for that, to about something you're interested in, report writing at the end, document creation, like all the protocols, the patient-facing documents, tell them what the study's about, why we want them to take part, how it's safe. And then you've got things like adaptability. You know, if you're a PhD too, you've often got stops and starts. Clinical trial all the time. We had to stop recently with the second one and started back up again, which is great. A lot of admin. Nobody like that, but it's part of the job. You know, if you're a PhD student, you've got experience in project oversight. You've taken a project from, you know, its inception probably, or at least one part of it was yours, and then you moved it through to the end. So you kind of been in charge of all that. You might have experience in line management, often you have a student. Delegating to the memorandum students, designing, that's my favorite part of working in clinical trials. Is I don't get to do a lot of that with my job, but that's always been my favorite part of research and science. Is you've got this problem, how can we solve it in a way within the constraints that we have? So I think that the other, okay, I'm going to top tip, and I would say this would just be my one top tip. You know, not one of them, you know, so don't assume employers have any idea what's involved in completing a PhD. So I have been in so many interviews where the reason I have one example, which I won't tell you the place, but I didn't get it because one of the questions was describe a complicated document and how you kind of create this complicated document and the outcome of it. So I talked about my PhD thesis. And I'm sure that was a shoe-in, and it wasn't. They wanted me to talk about a form I would have had to fill out in that job. So, and that's because I was working in a place where nobody had done a PhD. So to a lot of them, I think a lot of people see a PhD as another 4 years of undergrad. It's just, obviously, it's just not. It's a job, it's your life, it's just around you. I always felt like my PhD sat up here for the full 4 years. It just would always be there. I got married and went on honeymoon and it was there. My husband's still finishing his and it's there. It's all encompassing sometimes. It does end and you'll be glad it's over. When I submitted mine, I put on, George Michael's Freedom. That was like definitely, it just felt the light. So they won't. So you have to spell it out for them often what it is you did with these transferable skills that were so that's going to help you in that new job, because a lot of times they just don't get it, and that's a waste because you spent 4 or 5, maybe more years doing this, and for that not to sort of carry weight is really frustrating sometimes because this has been like blood, sweat, and tears. Right. Oh, these are my kids that have they have chocolate on face because it's Easter. Got Penny, Maggie, and Alfie. One thing I will just mention, in case you're wondering about how much in the public sector you learn. So in one of these sorts of jobs in the NHS, you look at band 5, 6, and 7. In the university, you'd be looking at E, F, and G, which is roundabout starting at 28,000 up to about 50 or 60,000, which is what it is. If you did the same job in the private sector, you would earn more money. I would say, I think starting in the public sector really gives you a broad range of skills that are really marketable moving into the private sector if that's something that's interesting to you. And I think too, there's something to be said for working in the public sector. At least the university has been really great. As I said, it is, flexibility. If this is something that's important to you, the flexibility, a lot of autonomy over your time. That's something that's been invaluable to me. But yeah, so it's just something to consider. So that's everything. I think, yeah, that was everything.
I'm just sat at the back, absolutely amazed by your speakers. So thank you so very much for doing so. So I'm Lisa Email, I'm part of the first service, but I work as part of my case over the early years, which is on post-doc community, and also I actually work with our PGRs in the past faculty actually. But Sandra, who's my colleague sat at the back, works with PGRs in nice work very closely with. So that's me. Anyway, I just want to say, we've got an opportunity now. So we've got about 15-20 minutes on, so more than that, we want to do questions to our speakers. So now is your opportunity to ask. So I know at this point the room goes silent. So I have questions for you. So I would just be interested to know. So as a careers consultant, we really encourage people to plan and do a lot of planning and this kind of stuff. So how much did luck or happenstance or planning play in your success in terms of what you do? So I don't know who wants to go first.
Okay, I think equal parts, to be honest. From my side, I was at the right place at the right time. I mentioned that as well.
Yeah.
In the presentation. They needed not only, for lack of a better term, they were at that point where they had a lot of people who could write grants. They had a lot of people who could look at the market, but they weren't generating the data they needed in the people at that time. So it was looking at. But so my plan for post PhD went out the window when they changed it to being, a probationary period. That wasn't the plan. It went out the window, but I decided to go with it. And I did plan it in the sense that I wanted to fill in that gap between the submission and the Viva. And I contacted one because I'd seen the professor and said, John, gave a talk. He's still chairman of the board, and he talked about quantum in a roundabout way. So that led me to seek him out. So it is kind of a combination of two, but
Yeah.
I think you have to be lucky at the right time as well. I don't know if you agree with that, but I think you do have to.
Can everybody hear everything?
Is that all right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, well, yeah.
Like when you're at the shop and you need to then work and didn't get one.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, so I would say that in terms of luck, I think it was a different situation for me, just because. I mean, I don't want to be talking about my kids, but I have a family, you can't get away from that, and so if you're a parent, probably a mother, things will, I feel like my career has been not like it's been the other way. I feel like I've had to work around becoming a mother and had to sort of not take what I can get, but a little bit of a scramble. Like, oh, I've only got so long for this one, that's I've got to find something. And that obviously isn't always mothers, tends to be. And so I feel a lot like I've been playing a lot of catch up in my career to get back to where I feel like I should be, which is incredibly frustrating. Very, very frustrating. But I just wanted to kind of be honest, because it might be something that eventually, or maybe it is now, that they're going through, and it's really frustrating when, and it is, what else is frustrating, we realize that people put the skills out, and it's really. All the soft skills you learn in the period.
Yeah. It's a lot more difficult. Fathers, I think that's well, from my experience.
I think sometimes it depends who's got which job, and you've got it in very practical, but yeah. So anyways, I don't think it's been luck as much for me, it's been sort of scrappy fighting back. So.
One thing about parents, that is really helpful. So then we have conversations with research, and because they're thinking about, well, actually, I need to in the 20s and late 20s or wherever they are, and thinking about settling down and having a family and all that. How do I help with those things? And it's very challenging. So I think between research here and that one.
When you asked the question, you said planning. In my head, that meant real planning, but it can be like planning as well. Planning. It's not just that.
So I think because I didn't say it, it was kind of, okay, this will do right now, and then things go along with that. Okay. Just, thank you.
I was curious about you saying project management and roles again. Is that like to get restructured as being like kind of asked to charity, being the departments, or as as you work with different people, and you might express an interest in how structured is
A combination of the two. And sometimes I think people just decide they want to change. You had some people in science students and decide, actually, I don't really want to do this. I can't live that. It's what I want to do. But they decided I don't really want to do that. And they would think, well, do I need to move on? Or is something else? A lot of the time it's people who work for us talk to people in other sectors or in other aspects of the business, right? So some people, one of the girls who went from our science team to work with the quality team, it made complete sense because she was best friend with someone in the quality team. So she found out there's nothing.
Yes.
What went into it, and she brought well up with and actually she was very good as a scientist. This works for her as well. So it can be a combination to I would say that it's a lot more flexible in SMEs than it would be if you're working with someone who's big multinational with tens of thousands of employees.
Yeah.
But if you're working for a company where a position opens up and you can actually, you know who I am, you know the strengths, can I do that? You're probably more likely to do it than a company that has 150 employees to do that thereabouts. So for us, it's a combination. It's definitely a pro thing that we're working small, you know, just to call and see this person's job, this person's job.
Yeah, I'm kind of feeling that like there's a change of opinion on like lab-based stuff and
Sure.
yeah, years now, I feel like you need to learn something different, so having that ability to move and get you put at the door with your current background, being able to choose something else.
Yeah.
That's what you think.
Yeah, it's like almost when you do a degree, right? Just because you do a degree, so doesn't mean you apply for a job in that area. Same kind of thing, nothing to change. I don't think you pull yourself too much. Provided you're adaptable and provided you sure that you will be super best for that. Again, it's kind of like it's the people that you know who sometimes get a job if you're in the company already. They know you, they know like they want to take you back out and say, well, I think you can fight out this. So it can work like that.
I have to say, there's a massive difference between the private sector and the public sector. And to be honest, I think there's pros and cons, but I've only been in the public sector. So for instance, when you're in interviews in the public sector, specifically, particularly the NHS, Newcastle universities aren't quite this bad. The bad is what you're going to do. So the NHS will ask you a question and then you'll get like marked on your answers. They'll write it down and they'll give you a score, and it's almost like the cumulative score of wins. Not always, there's like, but that can make it really tricky and frustrating. But equally, obviously, the public body, they need to be as transparent as possible. So if somebody said, well, why did this person get this job? They can be like, what kind of that side that? I recently applied for, well, not recently, before I applied for so a friend of mine does clinical trial work at a big pharmaceutical company, and she told me it was a job going, and she said, send me your CV, and I said, okay, so I sent it to her, and then she came over that day with her mom friends, and she brought her kids over, and they're playing stuff, and she was kind of talking to me about it. I said, have I applied for the job? She said, yeah. She said, I sent your CV in. I was like, well, who'd you give it to? She said, my manager. And I was like, oh, is that how it works? She said, okay, so now you're going to have an interview. And then she's like, yeah, I'm like, well, actually, she didn't tell me this. She was very helpful for weeks. I didn't get the job. She's very helpful for weeks. And I was like, well, you get the job, I get £1,000. So, yeah, and the fact that doesn't happen, so, you know.
You're supposed to be nice.
Right. I don't talk to her as much now.
Well, yeah, it's particularly as you're saying in clinical trials, you learn a lot of different things. Is it very structured as well in the way that you kind of pass an exam to add these things to your skill set? You know, so for example, I know clinical scientists in the NHS, they have past competencies and things like that. Is there something like that on your in the clinical trials learning different skills?
Not at the moment, but it's something that like it's being talked about, and it's because there is this recognition that we have all these skills that are hard to kind of quantify sometimes because there's no matrix to put it against. There has been a matrix created recently by something called the UK Child Management Network research. But anyway, they've recently, like within the last couple of weeks, come up with a matrix that we might start using in this sort of trials unit to say, okay, this trial manager has kind of met these milestones and therefore would be good for moving on to senior trial manager position. But I would say too, like even just working in clinical trials, you can see from mine, I worked in research, I worked in NHS R&D departments, right? That's a different than a clinical trials unit. A clinical trials unit, they kind of manage everything and do everything and then hand it off to the NHS research and development. And the research and development, they come in and then they, on the ground, run the trial, collect the data. So I've worked in both. I've worked in the HRA, the ethical people, and then, you know, if I wanted to, you know, I could think about maybe looking to work at a place like the NIHR, so the funding body, the charity. So there's quite a, like, or going to industry. That's really, there's such a big sort of options available to you, I think, when you work with clinical trials and health research, you do gain all these skills. And a lot of it is sort of fleshing out a lot of the stuff you do in your PhD anyways. You kind of PhD's your baby and you do all the stuff from start to finish and you kind of flesh that out and learn how to work in multidisciplinary teams and other different stakeholders and stuff. It's really fascinating.
I've got another question. Yes.
I have a question, Marc. I want to know that what the current situation, what and my plans in the industry. And is it location and industry specific, or is there any common rules applicable to
So I can only really speak from personal experience. I can only speak for SAP. From our side, we do have policies on how much we're allowed to work during the week. We have maximums, but unless you negotiate, so it's a ceiling with a possibility to expand, right? So we do have limits on that. I think if you go into larger companies, it's a lot more rigid in that sense. I'll give you an example that some people might not think about, but I know that my wife's brother, he works down in Cambridge, and they have something where, because this science part is so enormous, they have to think this time and have to leave at this time, because if everybody came at the same time, we actually can't, right? So it's going to be, I'm just going to make them, so it might be 5:30 to 5. So the company might be 9 till 1:30. So it's like a staggered thing like that. So you always have to work certain hours. And if you work for larger companies, it tends to be that you have routine rigid hours, and that's what you do generally. In the company that we're in, I'll take my experience. It's been peaks and troughs. Sometimes I've worked out a lot. Sometimes I've worked a little bit less. Sometimes they say, well, you did a couple of months where you were doing a lot of hours. If you want to move in 3 o'clock on Friday, move in 3 o'clock on Friday. Okay? So there aren't really standards that I know of. Each company tends to have their own policies in place. And it tends to be different from different companies, and the higher level of knowledge is. I think if you start at the bottom, if you start with necessarily say 100 employees, it tends to be very, very different at very different times. And that's not really an answer, is it? But hopefully that's an insight. And I know that a lot of the time, like I say, it is peaks and troughs. I've seen some people who work for us who've done insane hours for a few months, and then it's dropped off a lot, and they've absolutely got and it's been consciously done. When I said, actually, this person's working a lot, we need to make sure that they get some time to do later, or they can outsource some of their work to somebody else, that kind of thing. So it is quite flexible, but a lot of the time it's about having the management. If you have a manager who recognizes working there, then they'll have to some kind of clause in it. We do have maximums per state, and they have to be negotiated, have to be real. It might be more rigid than higher in terms of negotiations. That's the way I would see it.
Right, I mean, it's in the industry, or in the sector, I would think one of the benefits is definitely for work-life balance. So particularly when you're working for the university, because you may know this, but a lot of the institutes in the university have something called the Venus Swan Award, which I've heard of, and it's about quality in the workplace. And as a result, they have to kind of really make sure that they're kind of making things kind of fair and happy for all employees, and that benefits if you're working parent. So we've got in the last 2 years, I've changed my hours a couple times to work around my kids. So I went from full-time to 33 hours. That wasn't working. So then 6 months later, I got a new job so I could do that with the university, but I just didn't do it a year. But it wasn't working, and I won't move down to 30 hours. So I don't work on a Friday now, which helps with childcare, and it helps with childcare. Amazingly. So that, but also things. So to give an example, if I say needed to be working an hour early, I might not even say run that by my line manager because I know I'm going to work that hour. I'll come when I pick the kids up and I'll work another hour. It's sort of that you don't feel like there's a lot more autonomy. And this friend I was talking about, this large industry, young friend, I remember her once telling me that she wanted to just shift her hours so she could pick up her kids on a Friday afternoon, take her to the park, and she could still work those hours on a Wednesday. And she had to put in a request, and it took 6 months to get agreed. So that's the sort of difference, and it's just a little bit, especially if you've got a lot of pressures outside of working in your life, so having that little bit of okay, at the end of the day, it's your mental health and suffers if you don't have that nice
From our side, we are autonomous as well. We don't have sort of like cards which say, okay, you swiped in at 8:31 this day, you left at 4:15. That's less than your time. We don't have that. We do have the autonomy. It's just a matter of you, I guess, putting it away. Because if you're not, someone might say, well, you haven't done that, and they might mention it. Somebody, we manager might mention it. So it's not like you have this rigid timesheet thing, which is good. I guess that's one of the best things about what we are. But as I say, sometimes people are doing a lot. Exactly.
And that really comes back to a lot of research and development. Yeah.
Yeah.
So before you were applying for a job, actually having a look at their website, maybe having a look on LinkedIn, so that if somebody that you can connect with you, find out what it's like to work with that. And I think that's important. And I think it's interesting we've got a real difference in terms of private sector and public sector. And there is a big difference in terms of probably a lot more in the public sector, more of that. I think the word regulated is not quite right, but so many processes and procedures where you do maps, So it's really important to do that research. I'm conscious we've not had any questions from this side of the group. Oh, now we've got 3. Okay, go for it.
Now, when you both share your experience, I was in touch with one of the last points that it's about who you know. If you don't know anyone, how do you probably recommend how you put yourself out there for a company you don't know any connections to make us better.
Email. People don't do it.
So people don't do it.
Who do you email? I would go, LinkedIn's a good resource. LinkedIn's a good resource. But you can also, if you go on company websites, right, we tend to have email addresses, so it's not necessarily the specific stuff. It might be the specific. Yeah. So I know it's a difficult thing to. Actually, honestly, we get speculative CVs to keep them. We've also had people apply for jobs where we've said, well, like you, that's not the CV, but not for this job. We then contacted them a few months later and said, actually, this might be better for you. So it is a difficult one. It's quite hard. I would, if you want to drop an email to someone, do it. You might not get a response back. Sometimes you do. And we try to respond to everything. I know that's pretty good. So yeah, I would say LinkedIn is a very good resource. And it's a good way to contact people. Even if you send emails and say, I can talk to you about your job. They don't do it. Actually, it's quite nice because people like talking about it. I mean, I quite like talking about my job. So it's nice to have speculative stuff. And people don't normally do it. I've had it in the past where someone said, I like looking up, me, can I come and spend a bit of time with you? And we've not always said no to it.
What's the worst that can happen?
Exactly. Yeah. If you go with no expectations, obviously anything.
We second absolutely that. That Marc's described. We encourage you to do that. If you can get a name first, that's really helpful rather than just sending it to HR. Jump in the back.
Thank you for I also mentioned that there are quite a lot of different options in different areas for industries. I'm curious, is that the living skills first, and then got secondary options, or we got any options first, and then you learn the skills related to that, working with them? Or which one is more common?
No, sorry. I guess you talked to both of us, right? Talking to both. So yeah, I guess it's a transferable skills thing, really. I know it's used a lot, but we do see a lot of people apply for roles internally and before we know who they are, which might not be related to the experiences that they've had. If there's a very specific job role that needs very specific skills, that might be different. But sometimes we have people on sites like the quality management side, for example, where there's not really a degree in that. It's just a personal way that they are and a personal interest in process. So you can have, I guess, soft skills, which can go into personal interests, and that can happen. But you can also, like I say, you can be in a company and you might show that you're a particular kind of person. You might be very much a process-driven person. Someone might say, well, there's a job opening on the quality management side. They like process. Would you consider that? So, both, I would say, you can apply without, as long as something is really specific. If they say, going to make something up. If we need someone who has experience of next generation sequencing, then they're probably not gonna, they're gonna get people who do have that, and that will put them in full position for that. Right? But there might be some others which are a bit softer. And something else, I don't know how you feel about this one, but if someone has job requirements listed, right? If you satisfy all of them, awesome. If you don't let that stop you from putting in an application, right? Because even when it says essential, a lot of the time what we do at one, when I've said this before, in the essentials we put so much stuff. I'm thinking, if you don't need all of that, you really don't. It would be lovely.
Yeah.
This is the perfect candidate, but the perfect candidate doesn't exist. So don't let that into if you think, well, I've got that. We'll have that. Maybe I'll send my CV. Send it.
I'd say on that, like related to that, I was on the Phoenix committee for Iowa, and when they got the silver award, one thing we talked about PhD students, and this seemed to be an issue I thought might be more relevant to women, was that sometimes it was a woman that had raised this, that she said like sometimes the language of these applications can be like expert in minutes line, you know, and it sometimes it tends to be women who might be like, I'm not an expert, so I'll just leave it. I'm good, I'm not an expert. Where we would say, so might be that this was in relation to Swan trying to make things a bit more people better. Maybe changing the wording of these applications so that it wasn't so but I guess until that happens, or if that ever happens, keep that in mind, that expert, just you're an expert, you're fine. Just apply for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was going to ask essentially what are your experiences of your ability to either innovate, so you identify something in your organization, in process driven or in science because spot something or an organization. What role, I mean, how have you been able to sort of pursue that in your jobs? So NHS we quite process driven. My partners moved into a new job there and kind of struggled with how rigid the processes are. Very obvious. This is possibly how it is in
What flexible we are. I mean,
Yeah, I think so. Like I have, so when I work, when I was presenting my PhD to the NHS, well, I mean, I did go by but I was moved into the NHS and it was like a culture shock. Because I used to being in academia where like they're not to ask questions and like, oh my God, like this is weird. Can we look at this? And in the NHS, I mean, for very obvious reasons, there's a lot of public sector money. It can't be seen to be wasted, that sort of thing. So it has to be kind of by the book, but sometimes that felt a little constricting. It felt like, well, this is the way we've always done it. I do it. A lot of that felt frustrating sometimes. Sometimes it felt, I think sometimes more senior academics in university environments might be more like amenable or open to sort of more junior colleagues coming up with ideas, suggesting things. It didn't always feel like the case, but equally their jobs are different. So it has to be a lot more by the book, and this is what we know works. And this is, so that was a bit of a culture shock. Yeah, it was there was kind of a hierarchy, which obviously was in academia as well, but it felt more pronounced there, even down to, I very briefly for a month worked with the research midwives now, again, related to maternity stuff. Yeah. I mean, not from that. And like a colleague and I were talking, who also came from academia, we were talking about how, the uniforms can be very, put you into a category right away. So a band 4 wears a certain, a band 5 wears a certain, a band 6 wears a certain. And that's the other thing too. I didn't tend to introduce themselves by their bands. When I was a clinical trial coordinator, I would introduce myself as I was a clinical trial coordinator band 6. Like you would be like grade F here, like that would be weird. But there it's like very normal. It's band 5, get a band 5 to do that. So that was weird. There's more flexibility in university and more kind of. So my current job, no, I didn't help with the trial design, but because I wasn't in the job yet. But if I had been in people in my job that were, they would have been working with the CI to be like, okay, this is your initial idea. How can we flesh that out? What are the constraints we have to work with? Having thought about this type of a trial design as opposed to a randomized control trial, this might be a better one, this might be safer. So there is that kind of creative process that I think we all like when it comes to research, trying to solve a problem. I think one thing this is from trying to work in industry. So our job exists in industry, but what ends up happening is because there's so many resources that we do the big companies, there's so many resources that you only have to do one job. So like I do like this, and she does this, but she does it really well, right? She gets paid really well for doing it. But she also mentioned that what that or another friend who's mentioned that what that sometimes means, but then you don't get the experience in the other things. So then trying to move out of that role can be really difficult because you've only been in this role for 4 years. You haven't been doing, you're not the jack of all trades, you know? So I think that's something, to keep in mind. Yes,
In terms of the process, we can definitely be a bit more flexible about this. I think sometimes you just need someone to state the obvious. There are times that we're there and think, oh, yeah, this is how we've always done it. And then someone might come in and something and they might say, well, we thought about doing it like this, or we thought of having this. I'll give you an example. We used to order stuff ourselves individually in very early days. And it was an absolute mess. It was awful, right? It took ages, it took so much time. And someone came in who was very good at coding, said, "Look, great, if we could just have an online order form," and it went to somebody and he's built it himself. And when no one objected to it at first, he just said, well, yeah, can I build this? And he sort of went to the CEO and he said, yeah, well, that sounds like a great idea. And so he changed the process with an idea. What I wouldn't do is do it after you've been there and put it annoying you. But if you've been there a certain amount of time, then you know you have an idea how the process would work. You might think, well, this is great, maybe this would work better. In the company I'm in, I think that we do have a lot of processes which have iteratively improved over time when people have taken it on, said, actually, could maybe do this, can we change this? You can raise change requests and documents which can be accepted or rejected, that kind of thing. So in terms of process, it's constantly iteratively trying to improve. And sometimes it gets ripped up and started again when you realize it's far too complicated. So occasionally that happens. And we're not as constricted in that respect. So you can definitely chip in and say, you know what, this is good, this is fine. However, maybe this would be better. And usually that's adapted to people. Right.
We've got time for one more question. Anybody who's not asked a question? No, okay, can you go into the question?
I was just going to ask, I had noticed on your slide that you said get it to ask for forgiveness sometimes. I wonder if you could share an example of possibly when you've done that during the role.
Me first, see, I'm rushing up, said, well, I'll make the machine type first. And what's you know, it's something that's happened so often. I'll give you an example that I've done. Right? So we've got a process that we're trying to put onto the device. I'm going to be really careful here. We've got a process that we're trying to put onto the device, which would make it more adaptable than currently is. We've got this bit of data over here with these parameters. Because we've changed them quite a lot. You've got this data over here, which was done using this parameter set to this parameter set to that. You have this bit of data over here, which says it does this well, but you've changed this parameter, right? So you've got some data over here that shows one thing, some data over here that shows one thing, some data over here that shows another thing. They're all different from each other, they're set up differently. They're not representative of the final ones on product, process, that kind of thing. And so I sat back one day and I said, you know what, we don't actually know how good this is because we've done something here that is great. We can't do it here. There was a scatter of different bits of data. Okay. So I just decided, right, I'm going to plan a project out to actually benchmark test it. So we can say, right, let's get everybody together and say what can we actually do, and what's the flow rate for this, what's the concentration of this, which samples can we use this with, what's our target, etc. And just say, right, that's what we're going to test. And then we can say, that's how good it is. And do we need to improve it, or is it good to go? Because there's so much data here and all over this. And so I didn't even ask anybody whether I could do that. I just went away and planned it out and essentially went to the R&D and said, I think we should do this. Here's why. So it wasn't a case of doing something. It was a case of putting together a case for it. And we're now doing it. So we obviously agreed, which was good. But it was just, you got to a point where you said, you know what, we don't know enough yet. We don't know enough. And so you can sometimes get to the point where you have to kickstart something, if you like. So that's probably my most recent example. It happens so often that I can't remember any specific examples from other people right now, off the top of my head, if that makes sense. But yeah, people often do go off on 10 minutes when they're with the PBL long enough.
I think it's just, I'm not allowed to be nine. No, but that sounds really awesome. But I would say like that's one of the things when you're PhD that with that skill of that resourcefulness, right? And if it's just you have to be really resourceful and problem, you've got to fix it, you've got to find the answer, there's usually no one else to ask, very few people else to ask because you're the specialist. So you do become very resourceful because of the problem, I've got a solution. And it's great to do them that like totally, you know, welcome back, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I guess the little, right, you'll probably agree with this as well, right, is if you're gonna criticize something, have an alternative, even if it's not feasible, have an alternative, right? Because if you just come in and say, well, that sucks, okay, well, what would you do? And if you've got no solutions to it, then it just gets people back, so to speak. As long as you have potential solutions to it, you respond pretty well usually. You just have to, you know, struggle with it.
I think it's really interesting what we've been talking about. I think it's partly of that, an attitude of mind. But you're going to be resourceful, we're going to try and think about how we're going to come up with a solution. And I think it's also been really, really, because you with something that you really understand how the organisation works, and you're aware of not everyone's ways, but it's just go carefully. I'm in my probationary, you know, period, not accept people, but so I think those two aspects. I think it's really okay. So we are just going to applaud that to it really gives us a lovely basis from which Sandra and I are going to be doing lots of special workshops. So we're going to be looking at lots of things that we say. So we're going to be looking at where to find jobs, applications, transferable skills. We're going to be looking at CVs. There are lots of lovely, wonderful things for the rest of the session. We're going to take a 10 minutes break now, and there's been a refreshed copy of my first company. So it can be from the time when I watch, that's 5 to. Ooh, is it near? Well, near enough Friday. To begin our workshop. So that's what we're going to do. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yeah, I'll do the same thing.
Hello.